It's the first Sunday of Lent, and we find ourselves in the wilderness with Jesus. This is where Lent always begins. This is the very beginning of Jesus' ministry. He has just been baptized in the Jordan River by his first cousin, John. I know some of you were at the Ash Wednesday service this past week, and I hope you were able to pick up the blue half sheet about confession. As part of that, you were invited to pray the Jesus prayer through the week. Lord, be merciful to me, a sinner. I hope that you were able to carry that awareness in your heart as well as on your lips today. It might seem like your pastors have gotten the biblical order of the season mixed up. Shouldn't we confess after temptation? If Jesus had already fasted for 40 days before he faces this temptation in the wilderness, shouldn't we be right at the end of the 40 days of Lent rather than just at the beginning of it? Rather than trying to convince you this morning that your pastors know what they're doing, we're going to go back and look at that text from the Gospel of Matthew. Scholars call Matthew, Mark, and Luke the Synoptic Gospels. They have many of the same stories in basically the same order. Often they use even the same words of those stories. I have a chart in my study Bible. Many of you have probably seen it or have something similar of parallel stories in each of the four Gospels. Most scholars believe that Mark was written first. It's the shortest of the Gospels. And that all three Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, share common source material that no longer exists. There is no account of the temptation of Jesus in the Gospel of John, but it appears in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and those accounts are so similar that it's interesting to note the few differences and wonder why they're there. Each account begins with Jesus being led into the wilderness by the Spirit. The wilderness is a real place, but it also has symbolic meaning. It is a desolate place, an isolated place, a place without natural resources of food or water. It's where Moses led the children of Israel for 40 years. It's where the prophet Elijah hid out when he was being hunted by King Ahab. It's the place that nobody goes through unless they have to. But the wilderness is also a place where we encounter God. It's where Jacob saw angels going up and down a ladder between heaven and earth. It's where Jacob wrestled with God. It's where Elijah heard a still, small voice. And it's where the children of Israel experienced God's guidance in a pillar of cloud and a pillar of fire. The wilderness is a place that we don't want to go, but we have to get through. A number of years ago, when I was going through a very difficult time in my life, I worked with a wise counselor. I was probably being whiny and self-pitying at the time, but here are some words that he said that have stuck with me. He said, "Rosanna, sometimes the only way out is through." The Spirit is leading Jesus into the wilderness, and Matthew's gospel is the only one to add, "to be tempted by the devil." And I have to wonder, because Matthew doesn't tell us, did Jesus know he was being led into the wilderness to be tempted by the devil? When did he find that out? Why would he go? Would you go if you knew you were being led someplace to be tempted? The other small but significant addition that Matthew makes is that while the other Gospels say Jesus fasted for 40 days, Matthew says Jesus fasted for 40 days and 40 nights. Now, that doesn't change the actual length of time, but it's a coded statement for Jewish readers. Remember last week when we talked about Moses on Mount Sinai fasting for 40 days and 40 nights before he received the Ten Commandments? This phrase would have been a tip-off to Jewish readers that we are talking about a prophet, somebody who has a special, intimate, personal relationship with God, but also someone who is human because he was famished after fasting for 40 days. And when Jesus is weak and hungry and alone, the tempter, the devil, shows up. And the devil speaks to Jesus 3 times, and 3 times Jesus answers him from the book of Deuteronomy, one of the books of the law of the Old Testament. I believe that these are not 3 distinct temptations, they're 3 variations on a theme. And that theme is power and control. I think these have some contemporary resonance in the church and in politics. Listen and see what you think. The devil leads with, "If you are the Son of God." Now, this can also be translated, "since you are the Son of God," or "because you are the Son of God." The devil doesn't doubt that Jesus is the Son of God. The devil's not asking Jesus to prove that he's the Son of God. The devil is asking Jesus to prove that he's the Son of God by using the power the devil already knows that he has. The first temptation is about satisfying physical needs. It isn't only Jesus who's hungry right now. There are hungry people all over the place. And if you can feed those people, they will follow you. They will be completely dependent on you. If you can create jobs for unemployed people, you will win their support and loyalty. Give people what they want. Take care of yourself in the process. The second temptation is about spectacle and celebrity. Itinerant rabbis, they're a dime a dozen. What good is a message from God if nobody's listening or paying attention? You got to make a big splash and start this ministry off right. Something that will really make you stand out from the crowd. What's that book you're always reading? Psalms. That's it. Doesn't it say something in there about how God will protect you, send his angels to bear you up? How about let's try that in the middle of Jerusalem, in the temple? That will really get their attention, right? The third temptation is about world domination. I know that sounds like something out of an Austin Powers movie, but that's the final play for power, big power, ultimate power. Of course, Jesus, you're one of the good guys, so you'd use that power for good, right? We would all be better off if you were in control of everything. All you have to do is worship me. I know this sounds melodramatic. It's easy to imagine the devil as sort of oily and obvious, maybe even a little ridiculous. I mean, world domination, come on. Maybe you and I aren't tempted by ultimate power. But who among us hasn't wished for an easier life? God, could you just show me the shortcut around the wilderness? Because I really don't want to go there. I don't want to have pain. I don't want to be sick. I don't want people I love to die. I don't want to die. And this, friends, I believe is why we need confession. If we start Lent by swaggering into the wilderness, because we have some pretty good camping gear and some pretty great survival skills, I bet they could do a reality TV show about me and how I conquer the wilderness. We're in trouble. These are precisely the temptations which Jesus resisted. Temptations of power and control and celebrity. The devil loves it when we think, I can handle anything. Confession is acknowledging that we are led to places where the GPS doesn't work, where our education and our ingenuity and our effort are not enough, where things fall apart and we can't put them back together. Nobody wants to go to these places, but sometimes the only way out is through. Confession means turning our backs on the power and control that the world offers and acknowledging that we are limited. And the only way we're going to make it through the wilderness is if God meets us there. Our greatest temptation is to try to short-circuit this process. But we don't meet God by taking the shortcuts. Jesus was a human being like us, with free will. He was also the Son of God. He could have used the power that he already had in the ways that the devil suggested and skipped the whole terrible story of betrayal and suffering and crucifixion and death that we're going to be talking about in the coming weeks. And where would we be if Jesus had skipped that story? Lost. We would be lost in the wilderness with only our best guess of how to get through. We would be lost in our lives without the example of Jesus Christ to follow. We would be lost for eternity because without going through death, there is no eternal life. You have in your bulletin a half sheet of explanation and some suggestions for fasting for this coming week. Fasting has a long history in the church, in part because of this story of Jesus' temptation in the desert, which comes from the Gospels. Like any Christian practice that the church has tried to legislate and tell people that they must do and how to do it, fasting has some unfortunate baggage for some people. Here's how I see fasting, and here's how I would explain its benefit as a Christian practice. I asked at the beginning of this sermon, if you knew you were being led into temptation, would you go there? And for me, the answer is, yeah, of course. I walk into bookstores, I go into art galleries, I look at Amazon Prime online, and those are just the temptations that I'm willing to confess to in public. Of course, we go to places where we're tempted. Or maybe we're tempted to stay home and do nothing. The reality is that all of us have things that distract us from or destroy our relationship with God and with other people. And the most dangerous people are the ones who deny this. Addiction groups are full of people who say, Yeah, I can quit anytime I want. Those people are not in recovery. Those people are in denial. Fasting is a way of being aware of the things that we think we can't do without. What do you have trouble saying no to? Being aware of those things helps refocus us on God and what is most important in our lives. Fasting from food is traditional because eating is a pretty universal human experience. We all need food. But even changing the time that we eat or what we eat can make us pay attention to it in a different way and can remind us that there are people in this world, some of them are neighbors and in our communities, who can never take their next meal for granted. Take your bulletin home so you can read what's there. If you leave here today saying, Pastor Rosanna said that I have to skip a meal next week and there's no way I'm doing that, God bless you. You have missed the point. Here's the end of our text from Matthew. It's a word of comfort in this lonesome valley of the wilderness. Here's how the text ends. Then the devil left Jesus, and suddenly angels came to wait on him. Our closing song, On Eagle's Wings, is taken from Psalm 91, which is the same psalm that the devil quoted to Jesus in that second temptation. It's only when we are willing to go into the wilderness and not skip the hard work of going through it that we can be truly aware of God's provision and care for us. May God bless this Lenten journey, because the only way out is through. Amen.